so much for joining us today. My name is Emma Whiteman, and I'm Senior Content Marketer and Tech Writer here at Triumvirate Environmental. I'm so excited to be your moderator for today's Hazardous Waste e-Manifest Top Priorities webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to share that everyone's mics and cameras will be turned off for the entirety of the webinar. You can use the questions tab on the right to communicate with us and ask questions. Please also keep in mind that you will receive a copy of the slide deck and the recording in the days following the event conclusion if your question goes unanswered. I will also share contact information for our presenters at the end of the event should you need to reach out to us. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Charlotte Scott and Jill Corazzini. Charlotte Scott is a consulting director in Triumvirate Environmental's West region. In her role, she uses her expansive compliance knowledge to enable success for her clients. Be it lab sustainability, regulatory compliance, or any other EH&S need, Scott helps poise her clients for success. Jill Corazzini is an account and operations manager at Triumvirate Environmental, servicing our West region, specifically Southern California. She thrives in assisting her clients to achieve compliance and safety throughout all of their operations. Before we get started, I'd like to understand a bit more about who's in the audience today with two polls. The first is asking, are you a generator, transporter, receiving facility, regulator, or other? So I'm launching the poll now. Please take a couple of seconds to fill us in about who's attending this event. Charlotte and Jill, I still have a lot of people answering, so I'm going to leave it open just a little bit longer. All right, lots of good response. I see it slowing down. I'm going to give it like 5 more seconds here. Awesome. Well, thank you to everyone who responded. I'm going to end the poll here. So it looks like we have 82% of the audience are generators, 2% are transporters, 1% work for receiving facilities, 6% are regulators, and 9% of the audience are other. So just sharing that here. Awesome. Just to learn even a little bit more about you, we're going to ask, are you currently registered in RCRAInfo with access to eManifest? So I'm launching the poll now. The options are, I am RCRAInfo registered with eManifest access. I am RCRAInfo registered with no eManifest access, or I'm not RCRAInfo registered at this point. See lots of responses coming in. This is great. I love the participation. All right, just a couple more seconds here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So it looks like 62% of our respondents said that they are RCRAInfo registered with eManifest access. 12% are registered but do not have access to eManifest, and 26%, about a quarter of the respondents, said that they are not RCRAInfo registered. So moving right along into an agenda. We have an overview of what eManifest is and where it is most effective. Then we go into a bit of a deep dive into recent eManifest updates, namely the third final rule. Then we'll cover the EPA's top priorities and what generators need to be aware of before sharing some resources to stay up to date with eManifest updates. Without further ado, I'm very pleased to turn it over to Charlotte.
Thanks so much, Emma. Hi, everyone. We'll start with what is eManifest. So eManifest stands for Electronic Manifest. It's a national system the EPA launched in 2018 to track hazardous waste shipments electronically instead of using paper manifests. And the system modernizes the cradle-to-grave waste tracking process through EPA's RCRAInfo platform. The benefits are pretty big. It streamlines reporting, saves time and costs, and improves accuracy and transparency for both industry and states. And it's estimated that once fully adopted, states and industry will save over $50 million annually and reduce 175,000 to 425,000 hours of labor spent on what they did spend on paper manifest tasks. And where is eManifest effective? eManifest is effective nationwide, but each state has to formally adopt the regulations into their own hazardous waste program. And once a state adopts the rules, it becomes authorized to enforce eManifest requirements on their own. And until that happens, the EPA continues to enforce those parts of the program in that state. You can see where each state stands by checking the EPA's map on their website, and it shows adoption and authorization status across the country. And Emma, thank you so much for providing that link in the chat. And now we'll move on to Jill to start the discussion on the most recent e-manifest updates.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlotte. Appreciate that a lot. So as Charlotte said, I am going to talk through the most recent e-manifest updates. Looked like we had a good variety of people that were generators for the most part, but also people that are currently registered for e-manifest, but maybe, or they are registered for RCRAInfo, but maybe not specifically e-manifest. So I am going to touch upon the newest rule, which is the third rule associated with e-manifest. As some of you or most of you may know, that there are some parts of this that are currently in effect. They went into effect on January 22nd of this year, but there are some changes also coming on December 1st. So we'll also get into what to expect with some of those. So for the changes that went into effect on January 22nd, the first is that both small quantity and large quantity generators must be registered in RCRAInfo. As a lot of you said, you are currently, but for those of you who are not, there should be some very useful information in here on how to do so. The second rule is that if there are corrections to manifests, all parties must make those changes as requested. The third rule is that TSDFs are no longer required to send copies of their paper manifests back to generators. You may have seen that already go into effect. Maybe you have not. Some TSDFs, we are seeing them still send those paper manifests, but under this third rule, that is no longer a requirement. We're also seeing that discrepancy and unmanifested waste report timeframes have been extended for LQGs. We're going to get into some of those timeframes a little bit later with Charlotte. For number 5, we're also seeing that the hazardous waste manifest is changing from a 5-page document over to a 4-page document. Although that's in effect as of January 22nd, we aren't necessarily seeing this be used yet, but Charlotte's going to talk us through a little bit of that as we get later in the presentation. And we also have new requirements for any international movement documents. So if you are exporting your waste, this is going to be an update for you. For any of the generators on the call, it may not directly impact you, but it's useful to just know that there are some changes in place. And the last change as of January 22nd, that's going to be that TSCA has now updated the PCB manifest requirements. So we're going to talk about that briefly as we get later in the presentation. The last thing that I want to bring up for now, we'll touch on this towards the end, but December 1st, we do have a couple of changes coming, and that's going to be that exception, discrepancy, and unmanifested waste reports are now being submitted through e-manifest. Previously, maybe you've been doing this through your local states or regulators and submitting these by mail. That is no longer going to be the case. So we'll go into some of the details later on. And the last one is for anyone that is exporting your waste. Export manifests are now also going to be included in RCRAInfo in the e-manifest system. One thing I do want to note is that as of the EPA's update that came out in October, they held a webinar that went through some of their updates. They did say that due to the government shutdown, that deadline could change if they're unable to continue to work on this. But for now, they want generators, transporters, disposal facilities to all be prepared for these changes to go into effect on December 1st. They're still planning to launch them that day, but obviously if the shutdown continues or they have delays in the process, then they're going to maybe have to push that deadline. So we just encourage everyone to please sign up for EPA updates and keep an eye on the website so they know if that December 1st deadline stays the same or does get pushed out. So I'm going to kick us off with the first update that I did touch upon, and that's that large quantity and small quantity generators must be registered in RCRAInfo. As we saw in the poll, the majority of people are, but not everyone is. So this is a very important update for those of you who are not registered in RCRAInfo, but are a generator. You will need to make sure that if you do have that RCRAInfo account, you are also registered for the e-manifest portion of it, and that you have at least one authorized user who's able to access all of the completed manifests in e-manifest. For VSQGs or PCB only generators, they are not required to register unless their state is mandating them to do so. So that's done on a state level, but per the EPA, they are not required to register. For non-registered VSQGs, they should be coordinating with their waste handlers to make sure that if they need to correct manifests or any of their manifest data, they would need to work directly with them to do so, since they are not going through eManifest. And for optional uploads, some receiving facilities may choose to upload their return manifest copies into eManifest. They're able to do so, not required to do so. But for some VSQGs and PCB only generators, they would be able to use eManifest if they wanted to, but they are not required to. In moving along to the second change, for the second one, as I had mentioned, this is for manifest corrections if requested. So what do we mean by that? For the correction requirement, handlers, transporters, and generators need to submit any manifest errors within 30 days from the EPA, state, or paper processing center sending those corrections to the generator. So if they were to hear that they had to make any changes to their manifest, they have 30 days to make those changes as requested. Who's responsible for changing the manifest or correcting the manifest, should I say? Ultimately, that's going to fall on the disposal facilities for the full responsibility. They are the ones receiving the waste. They're going to be the ones verifying that the manifest is accurate and that what they're receiving is what's on the paperwork. If they notice any corrections need to be made, they are to reach out directly to the transporter generator and make sure that they are also making those copies to their manifests. There is guidance from the EPA on their webpage, and it outlines the standards and roles of each person involved. Emma, thank you for putting that in the chat. If you go to that link, it'll take you to the EPA's website, and they can help outline how to do these specific corrections and who is going to be responsible for what. So if you have any questions on that, highly recommend using that link. Extremely useful. One thing I did want to note, any party involved in manifest signing can submit corrections and updates at any time. So although we say the disposal facility may be the ones that are ultimately responsible for this, if a generator or someone else along the way notices that there are changes needed for the manifest, then they should in fact inform all necessary parties so we can make sure that we're updating the paperwork. And I am going to turn it over to Charlotte.
Thanks, Jill. So number 3, beginning January 22nd, 2025, TSDFs or treatment, storage, and disposal facilities no longer return paper manifest copies back to generators in the mail. However, they may continue to send the signed manifest back to generators if their facility permit still requires that until that is eventually updated. It's also possible that some states may want to look at paper copies during inspections until their regulations are updated, but we want to point out that per the EPA and these new rules, paper copies are not needed since the EPA considers the electronic record in RCRAInfo to be the official copy of the manifest. So that should be all that you need. We do want to point out that DOT, though, requires paper shipping documents, including manifests to physically accompany hazardous materials shipments. So that includes hazardous waste shipments. So unless the transporter holds a DOT-approved special permit, which allows for electronic shipping papers, a paper copy still has to be used. And so far, no transporters have received that special permit to EPA's knowledge. So at this point, a paper copy of the manifest is still needed on the truck. So as a best practice, especially during this transition to a fully electronic system, we recommend that you keep and file your generator copy as usual, and at the very least, download and keep copies of the TSDF signed copy in your files, especially so that you have full documentation if the state regulations and state inspectors aren't aligned yet. And I'll go into number 4, discrepancy report and unmanifested waste report timeframes are extended. So also starting January 22nd of this year, the EPA extended several key reporting timeframes related to manifests. These changes apply to both facilities and generators, giving everyone a little more time to reconcile discrepancies and track missing manifest copies down. For facilities, discrepancy reports now need to be submitted within 20 days after receiving a shipment instead of the previous 15 days. And if a facility's permit still says 15, continue following that time frame until it's officially updated. And this update gives facilities more time to verify shipment details and report discrepancies in e-manifests and in the system. For LQGs, the timeline is also extended. You'll now start looking for your signed copy of the manifest after 45 days instead of 35 days. And if you still don't have the signed copy uploaded to the e-manifest system by 60 days, you'll file your exception report, up from the previous 45-day requirement. For SQGs, nothing changes. The exception report is still due within 60 days if the signed manifest copy still has not been received. And just to note, some states may still reference the old timeframes until they're updated. And moving on to number 5, the hazardous waste manifest is changing from 5 pages to 4 pages. So effective also this January, EPA's plan was to utilize a 4-page hazardous waste manifest, with the current 5-page version allowable until this December 1st, giving everyone time to adjust. However, even though the 4-page format was effective in January, you can't purchase it yet. The EPA hasn't approved the updated template for printing by any of the authorized vendors throughout the country. So for now, everyone will continue to use the 5-page manifest until EPA confirms otherwise. The big change is that the designated facility copy, copy 3, is being eliminated. The continuation sheet is being shortened from 10 lines to 7, so you'll see a slightly different layout there. And for international shipments, there's a new process. The international shipment information is moving from section 16 on the front page to section 33 on a continuation sheet. So that means every export shipment will now require a continuation sheet. And there's also a new section for waste stream consent numbers, which ties back to export notices. And the new 4-page hazardous waste manifest will look a bit different. The top copy will go to the designated facility or U.S. exporter for submission into the e-manifest system. Copy 2 is the designated facilities copy that will go back to the generator. Copy 3 is the transporter's copy, and the bottom copy, copy 4, is the generator's initial copy. And as we talked about, it's not in use yet as of this November, and we'll continue using the 5-page version for now. And now back to Jill.
Thank you, Charlotte. So Charlotte just talked a bit about the changes for export documents, and I'm going to continue to do the same. I'll start by saying for generators, this may not directly impact you, but for some of you who are exporting your waste, I think it's definitely worth just at least knowing that there is a change going on. So again, effective as of January, exporters must now include their RCRA or Canadian tracking number on their manifests. Once the new electronic reporting date begins, that's still to be announced, the exporters are going to have to send a signed copy of their waste import-export tracking system, or the WIETS, within 3 days after getting that from their foreign facility. So that's one change that's coming. The other change is for any US facilities. They are required to send a copy of that WIETS within 3 days after that shipment arrives at their facility in the US. So those are some new dates still to be announced on when that is going to be, but that is one of the changes coming for those export documents. The other is going to be that there are supposed to be future systems in place that are going to allow sharing and updating and notifications between different countries. So that could be a nice change that's coming into play, but yet that's not announced yet. So we have to wait to see when that's going to be. But it could be another change that's coming in the future. I did bring this up because Triumvirate, we do send some of our waste as exports going to other countries. So for us, this is something that we have to be prepared for as we are putting together paperwork for these exports, and also anyone else on this call that is exporting their waste as a transporter disposal facility. This could be useful information for you to know, but on the generator side, there's nothing that you have to change at this time. And moving on to number 7, I won't take too much time on this because we don't see it too much, but under TSDF, any manifested shipments of PCBs, the generators, transporters, and receiving facilities must make data correction submissions within 30 days of receiving those corrections from the EPA or a state. So kind of similar to how we talked about earlier, those corrections need to be made within 30 days, and this is for manifested shipments of PCBs that do fall under TSDF. The e-manifest system can also be used to fulfill PCB waste tracking and record keeping requirements. So I just wanted to point this out. We don't see this too often anymore, but if this does apply to you, we want you to at least be aware of this change for PCB manifests. So what changes are coming on December 1st? I mentioned these earlier, but those exception, discrepancy, and unmanifested waste reports, those are now going to be flowing through the e-manifest system, as well as export manifests. Those were previously exempt, but not anymore. Those are also going to be uploaded into e-manifest. I had touched upon this earlier, but I will say one more time, we want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on this deadline. Please prepare for this to go into effect on December 1st at this time, but that could change in the future if EPA does announce so. But for now, let's still plan for this to go into effect on December 1st. Diving into that first change that is occurring on December 1st for the exception, discrepancy, and unmanifested waste reports. Those are now going to have integrated reporting through that e-manifest system. Previously, depending on what state you're in, you may have been submitting those through the mail to authorized states or regional administrators. That is no longer the case. Those are now going to be uploaded into e-manifest. There is no fee for submitting the unmanifested waste reports, so that's a good win for the generators. And also, states will be notified automatically and will have immediate access to any of these reports in RCRAInfo. So overall, I think this is pretty exciting. It should really improve reporting and record keeping, as well as transparency amongst different groups and generators. So this could be a really nice change coming into effect on December 1st. And the second change coming into effect on December 1st is that export manifests are now in eManifest. Generators, the first one related to exports may not have applied too much to you, but this one does if you are exporting your waste outside of the US. So they were previously exempt. They are no longer. They will be flowing through RCRAInfo. So as the exporter, they are now responsible for submitting all of those export manifests, whether they are paper or electronic, into eManifest within 30 days of the final transporter reaching the U.S. port of exit. That exporter is now also responsible for paying any associated user fees that go through eManifest. And for the final transporter, there's also a change coming here because they now have to send their manifest copy to the exporter instead of the generator. So as we had mentioned before, they were sending it to the generator in the past. Those are now going to be uploaded into eManifest, so they no longer need to send that copy back to them because they can all be found inside of eManifest, since that's where the export manifests are going to be. Before December 1st, final sign manifests, as I said, they were going to the generators. They now are going to get those copies through eManifest. So that's the major change for the generators on the call. Any export facilities that might be on the call, you now have to upload those copies into the eManifest. So there are a few different changes going into effect on December 1st. If you're not exporting your waste, I wouldn't get too bogged down in this, but if you are exporting your waste, I would check out the EPA website and look into this a little bit more to make sure that you understand how the process flow is going to work as of December 1st. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Charlotte to walk us through the EPA's top priorities.
Awesome. Thank you, Jill. So the EPA's top priority for eManifest centers around expanding electronic adoption with the ultimate goal of reaching 100% electronic manifesting. They're also focused on supporting users. They have monthly public webinars, regular email updates, and they have a pretty responsive help desk. On a recent webinar, they let us know that they respond to questions usually within just a few minutes. The EPA also continues to train both industry personnel and state regulators, while also coordinating with the DOT to align eManifest with hazardous materials shipping requirements, which includes alternatives to the physical shipping paper. And finally, the EPA is working to improve the overall function of the eManifest system. And some things they've been focusing on there are error identification and data quality for items like biennial reporting. So I know a big percentage of those on the call right now are generators. So we wanted to go through just some advice on what hazardous waste generators should do right now. So first, make sure at least 2 people at your site are registered in RCRAInfo as site managers with certifier access. Next, be aware that these new rulemakings are already in effect. Even if your state hasn't updated its regulations yet, the new rules are governed by the EPA until the state is authorized and adopts the regulations. Also, keep in mind, most of the third rule updates we went over today impact the facility, not the generator, but it's still important, of course, to stay informed. Next, keep an eye on the December 1st updates, which could shift if there's a federal, with the federal government shutdown. And then we also recommend that you sign up for EPA email updates and submit questions through your account. Take advantage of the EPA webinars and emails and outreach that they are sending out. And as we said earlier, we do recommend keeping PDF or printed signed copies for your records of their manifests. And you can do that by logging into RCRAInfo and checking on the status of the final TSDF signed copy. Check your state's guidance regularly. And finally, always know your generator status, whether you're a VSQG, SQG, or LQG. The regulations differ a little bit depending on your size. And we're here to help if you want to connect with us about your site specifically. And I'll pass it over back to Jill.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, that's great advice right there. And just to kind of reiterate what Charlotte said, we want to make sure that you all have these resources down. So below, we're going to have, thank you, Emma, putting that in there. We're going to have a few different things for you. So first of all, the direct email address for eManifest, you can see that right there, emanifest@epa.gov. We highly recommend that you write that down. And if you have any site-specific or state-specific questions, definitely reach out to them. Their business hours are 8 a.m. Eastern to 6 p.m. Eastern. As Charlotte said, super responsive. We've reached out to them many times ourselves, and they've been very useful, great response time. And they've even said they highly encourage questions. They would rather you feel comfortable with this than feel like you don't know. We have also included their phone numbers down below, so you can also jot those down if you'd like. And we also gave the link below that's going to show you your specific regional contacts. So Emma dropped it in the chat. But if you follow that link, whatever state you're in, you're going to have associated contacts for that state that can answer site-specific questions, state regulatory questions. And again, response time is great, and they will be able to help you on a much more personal level. Once you follow that link, it'll take you to a page that looks like the screenshot that's on the right of the slides. And it'll have all the same information that's on our slide here as well. So if you don't get the chance to write all this down right now, if you use the link that Emma sent, it's going to take you to the same information. And also, as Charlotte mentioned, please sign up for the email updates through EPA. Emma's going to drop that link in the chat as well. But they do a great job of sending emails of any updates that's going on. If there's any webinars or anything that they're doing, they'll make sure to send those out. We highly encourage you to attend them. We attend them ourselves. We found them very useful. It's a great time to go ask the regulators your questions in a very similar setting to this. It's very beneficial. But I'll also say that Emma's going to send out Charlotte's information, my information, and we are happy to be resources as well, whether it's helping you reach out to your representative at the EPA to ask these questions or working directly with us to help you feel comfortable with these changes going into effect. We are here and happy to do so. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Charlotte to talk a little bit about how Triumvirate can help further.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, so we'd like to go over some benefits as to why you might work with Triumvirate on eManifest compliance. First, we want to mention we have deep expertise in EPA and DOT regulatory requirements, ensuring our clients' program stays compliant as these rules continue to evolve. And we have teams of specialists, consultants, facility personnel that have years of experience working with this every day at our facilities and our client sites. Next, our work is directly integrated into our clients' waste operations. We have personnel at our client sites managing the full process from waste characterizations to compliant storage to transportation and then ultimately disposal. And we handle the record keeping portion of hazardous waste manifests as well so that our clients don't have to do that. We also have teams of EHS consultants, environmental specialists to help reduce that administrative burden. We work on EHS management tasks, training, other compliance items as an extension of our clients' teams. And speaking of that training, if you do need RCRA or DOT or even a one-on-one training to support with RCRAInfo or the eManifest system, we can provide custom trainings for you. And for organizations with multiple sites, we can keep eyes on all of them, making the oversight of multiple sites easier on our clients. And lastly, we take a partnership approach, working alongside our clients' team to streamline compliance and provide customized support that works for you. So all in all, we'd be happy to work with you. And as Jill mentioned, you'll have our information and feel free to reach out to us for more information and support. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Emma. We're going to start our question and answer session.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charlotte and Jill. This was a lot of really, really great information. I want everyone to take a quick second and just write down Jill and Charlotte's emails here. Take note of those. I will send them later, but these guys are the experts and they're super helpful. So please make sure to take note of how to contact them. We have tons of questions coming in. I'm just going to get right into it and use the most of our time. So the first question, I think this is a good question for Jill, but Charlotte, feel free to hop in as needed. So Jill, do you think that Triumvirate will continue to process manifests?
Yeah, Emma, that's a great question. Triumvirate will definitely continue to prepare hazardous waste manifests for our clients when we're helping with their shipments. As we had mentioned earlier, our drivers are still going to have to carry physical copies of hazardous waste manifests per DOT regulations. So we will definitely still continue to process those on our side.
That sounds great. Charlotte, maybe you can field this one. Someone here is asking, is manifest availability in the EPA's hazardous waste platform sufficient to meet the regulatory manifest retention requirements, or should this data be downloaded and stored in company or plant files? I think you might have touched on this, but.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, electronic hazardous waste manifests that are stored now in RCRAInfo right there online in the eManifest system, that is now sufficient to meet the manifest retention requirements. But as we did mention, we do recommend logging in, downloading those PDF copies to essentially be a backup in case maybe you need it and there's no Wi-Fi access, or just to be fully safe. We recommend downloading those copies, having a, whether you still want to keep them printed out in a binder, that's not necessarily required anymore. But some inspectors may still expect that during on-site inspections. So we recommend, that manifests are downloaded, they're stored, even printed out until we're further along in this process with the adoption of e-manifesting.
Jill, kind of popping back into like the more of the eManifest platform. So how would you go about approving revised manifests on eManifest or within RCRAInfo?
Okay, good question. So as long as you are registered for RCRAInfo and then registered for eManifest, you would then become a certified or a user with certifier access is what it would be called. Once you have that access, you can approve any revised manifests for your site. So I believe you'll navigate into the eManifest section of the RCRAInfo account. Under manifests, you'll then see a section that says under correction. Under that, it will then say something like action items. And if you have any manifests that are needing approval of those revisions, they should populate there and you should be able to go in, review those, and then also approve them if necessary.
Great, that's very practical. Thank you so much. Charlotte, so if I'm filing return copies and correcting manifest errors, are there any compliance issues that may arise from failing to check the eManifest system?
Yes. So since return copies are now, generated by the facility in RCRAInfo, you will need to check the e-manifest system to verify that the facility that their waste was shipped to submitted the manifest into the system. There is still a chance that you'll receive that paper copy back for some facilities, such as in those cases where their permit still requires them to mail you a hard copy back, but that isn't necessarily done for each and every facility. So definitely you'll need that access to RCRAInfo, log in, make sure that you're receiving those final TSDF copies. And also if there are any corrections, like Jill was just talking about, you can't correct those anymore without logging in and accessing the e-manifest system. So that could lead to a potential compliance issue if you're not checking routinely in there. So all in all, yes, there could be some compliance issues that could arise from not checking the system, whether it's not seeing your return copy or not making any changes that were requested.
Yeah, that sounds good. And you said when Joe was talking about corrections before, I think this is an interesting question to kind of transition into. So who would be responsible for manifest corrections? Is it more oversight expected by way of using e-manifest for exceptions, discrepancies, et cetera? I'll let either of you take that. Maybe Jill, I'll just ping pong back and forth.
Yeah, no, I can definitely take that, Emma. So I touched on this a bit earlier in the presentation. I'm going to start with the first part of that question. So primarily, manifest corrections are going to be owned by the TSDF, and then those will then be pushed down to the transporter and generator, depending on what correction is needed, but they'll make sure that they're passing it along so everyone can make sure that they're all aligned on what changes are needed. I did also mention, though, that the EPA can also initiate corrections through their paper processing center. Those are the corrections that need to be made within 30 days. So there's kind of a couple parts there. But basically, any person that's named on the manifest is able to submit any post-receipt data corrections at any time. So basically, anyone can say that, hey, we need to make a correction to this manifest, something was incorrect about it. It's just important that we're following the timelines and making sure that all parties that are involved in the manifest are getting that data. The other thing too, I believe Emma put it in the chat earlier, but there is that document that has video tutorials. It's also going to have kind of like a handout of like how-tos of how you're going to correct those errors and manifest data. So if you use that link, that will help break down for you who's going to own what manifest corrections. So hopefully that'll help you on kind of your specific situation. Moving on to the second part of that question, I think it was, is there more oversight expected? Something of that nature, with the exceptions and discrepancy reports now flowing through eManifest. I would say that there is not going to be more oversight. They're not asking, you to do anything different. We were already being asked to do any of these reports, but now there's just a different method for how we're submitting them. With that, I do think that there's going to be more transparency among the EPA and the state regulators, as well as the generators. There's now going to be basically this online database that is going to have all of the record keeping for any reports for your site. So I don't think that there's necessarily more oversight, but I could see that during an audit, now that there is better record keeping for these things, there could be some cross-referencing between what was submitted through eManifest and what do you have on record for any reports on site. So not necessarily more oversight, but I definitely think that it could be improved record keeping and transparency more than anything.
That sounds great. And I think it seems like we're seeing a lot of process changes and a lot of updates here. Obviously, we had a whole webinar about it. So one process that people are specifically interested in learning about is changing their certifying official. This is coming up again and again in the questions tab. Charlotte, Jill, any insight into that?
I can answer that one. So if you have an account in RCRAInfo and you are registered as the site manager, you can change any permissions and then grant or deny permissions requests for colleagues or anyone else like trying to get access. So if you need to change access from, someone having that, certifying access, you should be able to do that as the site manager.
Awesome. That sounds great. A little bit of a different question, but I guess somewhat related, but is there any sort of US EPA authorized program or app that will allow people to stay up to date on changes, allow people to sign electronically during initial pickup, generators, brokers, TSDFs, all being able to use this together? Do you know of anything like that?
I'll take this one, Emma. I think this person is referring to like the fully electronic version of manifest signing. If that's the case, in the EPA's last webinar that we attended, they did say that there's about 1% of manifests that are being signed using fully electronic systems, and those are mainly only for Superfund sites right now. So we don't personally know of anyone that is using this right now. That will become or could become a thing in the future. As Charlotte mentioned, there is that special permit for transporters that they would be able to maybe carry that fully electronic version of the manifest. But that's something that is not necessarily being done at this time. And I think the other part of that question was, is someone able to sign if they're not specifically on site? Again, that is something that is allowed. I'll give a little background on it. I think it was back in 2023. Through RCRAInfo, you could get registered as what was known as like a remote signer. And you would have basically the ability to sign that remotely if you weren't physically on site during the time of a waste shipment at your site. So under that policy, if like anyone in the field was unable to sign the manifest, but they worked for the same facility or transporter and have knowledge of the waste shipment, they could potentially sign those manifests using that electronic system. There were two methods to do so. One was going to be the remote personnel would then enter through like the eManifest user interface. So basically go into eManifest, they're set up in the system as a remote signer, and they would then be able to sign on behalf of them during the waste shipment. And the second part of that, if I remember correctly, it was electronically signing using like a system-to-system communication. So that would require less people to register for RCRAInfo and have to obtain access to their site, but they would have to find a way to set up like a special network attached device during the shipment. And they would have to get approval from state and federal regulators to do so. So that was a very long answer, and I apologize for that. But the takeaway is EPA has allowed for remote signers, but at this time, we have not seen any of our generators, at least, signed up and approved to do so through state and federal regulation. So we're still seeing generators coming to site and physically signing their manifests, and us as transporters, we are actually doing the same thing.
That's great. And it seems like there's obviously a lot of people that are involved in this process. So maybe Charlotte, so can more than one person have access to electronic documents within this eManifest platform? Just to confirm.
Yes, definitely. So as long as they're assigned the correct role in RCRAInfo with the site's EPA ID number, as I was mentioning before, with the site manager being able to provide access, that site manager would just have to give them permissions to view e-manifests, and definitely, yeah, more than one person at a site can have access to that for sure.
Great. So with all these moving pieces and all these different folks out there, a lot of people are interested in if you guys had any best practices for getting various people on board. Like, for example, like a transporter, a truck driver who needs to take this manifest and hand it off, or a waste, take a waste and hand it off. So how would you go about getting all these different people on board with this program?
Yeah, I think for us, Emma, specifically, a lot of the time we are the transporter. So we try to stay super up to date on, what is the EPA rolling out? What are the new regulations? Because obviously we want to make sure that we're in compliance and also we're meeting the expectations of our clients. So with the e-manifest system, as we said earlier, relating to the 4-page manifest, as soon as those are ready to be rolled out, we are definitely going to be on board to do so. With fully electronic manifests, if it comes to a time where, they're starting to have transporters get those permits, I think that's another thing. We would definitely go down that road and start to look into it if it's something that would improve efficiencies for both us and our clients. But there definitely needs to be collaboration between DOT and EPA, which the EPA is currently working on. And we don't currently have the special permit. Other transporters don't currently have that special permit. But in the future, if that's something that we're able to get and DOT says, we're good, we don't have to have those paper copies anymore, that's definitely something we would be on board with. It's just trying to, walk the fine line of when's the right time to make that change. And there's still some things that EPA and DOT are working out together. So once that is in a good spot, we'll definitely start to cross that bridge.
Awesome. And I will throw in a little bit of a state-specific question here. I know we've kind of talked about Triumvirate as a whole, but a lot of people are very interested in California, which is very fitting considering you're both working out in our West region. So someone here is asking about the change in the time frame for TSDF copies to be received under the new rules. Is it 45 days? Is it 60 days? Do you have any updates on the California-specific DTSC rules here?
I can take that one. So overall, even if a state has not adopted its, the new version of the regulation, the 60-day deadline that is the new EPA's rule still does apply. And we came across a document actually prepared by the state of Maryland, which describes it really well. And if I'm remembering correctly, the e-manifest system all stems from what is the e-manifest Act, which requires that if a regulation is adopted by the EPA, then the EPA has the authority to implement those rules in each state. And that's until the state adopts that officially. So, it might sound a bit strange, but yeah, even if your state hasn't adopted the rule yet, it still is in effect and can be, regulated by the EPA directly. So, regarding California and the DTSC, not publishing their timeframe from that 45 to 60 days, just to be safe, you can still utilize that 45-day deadline until the DTSC or until your state publishes a new regulation revision. So just know, it is still in effect, even if your state doesn't publish it, but, it's not that drastic of a change. So if you, prefer just as a best practice, you can continue to use that 45-day deadline until your state officially puts that in writing.
Yeah, that's a great point. When in doubt, stick with the shorter, more strict time frame. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emma, I'll add one thing on that too. Yeah. I mean, we did also share, back to that map that we were looking at, that had the contacts that were like your specific states, like contacts. I think too, like if this is something that in California, you're worried about, you've heard different things from Coupa or whatever regulatory body is coming to site during an audit, and maybe you've heard mixed things. I think it's absolutely reasonable to just send them an email and say, hey, I know this is the EPA's change. I just wanted to see, I'm specifically in this county. Is that going to be what regulators are going to be looking for during an audit? Or do we have to follow, still the 45 days as an LQG? I think it's totally appropriate to just send them a message specifically in your situation and just ask what we should be prepared for. And that way too, you also have that documentation. If an auditor did ever come to site and, maybe they did start to question you using the 60 days, you also then have that email that said, I tried to reach out, I got an answer, they said 60 days was good. And then, you have that at least to kind of back you up as well. But when in doubt, I think it never hurts to just ask them direct.
Yeah, that's a great point. Definitely just reaching out with those resources that we sent. That's awesome. Jill, maybe you can take this one as well. So how would you go about adding an additional site manager if you're even able to, or is there one site manager that has to do it all?
Okay, yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So there is a way to add a new site manager. So you're gonna register like you would normal register for eManifest. You're gonna request site access using your EPA ID. And then once you have that, you can then request, it'll literally say request site manager access. Whoever the current site manager is going to be able to approve or decline that request. So as long as, they're on board, they want you to become a site manager with them. So there's a couple people in there. They're able to approve that once you do request it. And then each site must complete, it's like an electronic signature that's going to say that you're allowed to basically have you're the site manager for that account. Each state does it a little differently too. Some of those might be electronic or some of those might be like a physical signature. But it should say when you go to fill out that form, how you're supposed to fill it out.
Great. Thank you for that. I think we have time for maybe one more quick question. So we've been hearing a lot of questions or seeing a lot of questions here about state differences in the eManifest program. And for, at the risk of going super deep into every single state, because I'm sure there's a ton of them, can you give some like high level overviews of what some of the state differences may be here?
Yeah, I can take that. Just thinking about state differences overall, and one that comes to mind could be that, have to do with the waste codes that different states may implement. So like California, for example, has a long list of state waste codes that are called non-RCRA hazardous waste, and all those wastes are considered hazardous in this state. Or like Massachusetts has a code for non-hazardous waste if it's shipped on a hazardous waste manifest. So taking into consideration those different state codes, there is a published list that the EPA put out of when you would need to push a manifest through the eManifest system. And ultimately, if you're using a hazardous waste manifest for a state code, it's likely that you're going to, that manifest is going to be uploaded through the system, and, you will need to use eManifest. But those differences come into play that different states may regulate different items as hazardous waste. So we can probably pull this link, but there is a link and a good site from the EPA that they published all of the state waste codes that need to go through the eManifest system. So you can check that out on the EPA's website. But overall, that's one big difference that I can think of.
Awesome, that's great. And I will make sure to share that link to that resource in our follow-up email that everyone will be getting. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions, but I thank you guys so much for answering just so many questions and running a incredibly informative event. And I want to thank everyone for attending today as well. After the event, as we've said, you will be, sent an email with the presentation and the recording. Also, as soon as you close out, you will be directed to a very short survey, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback on the event, including any ideas that you may have for upcoming future topics that you'd like to learn about. Please reach out to Jill, Charlotte, or myself if you have any further questions. And thank you so much for your participation. We look forward to seeing you at future upcoming Triumvirate Environmental events. Take care.